Hello and welcome to my presentation on the philosophy of education. So during this module, we learned a little bit about some Greek philosophers such as Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato. And we also looked at Nell Noddings, Paulo Freire, we looked at the nature versus nurture debate. And regarding my knowledge on the philosophy of education before this module, I had myself been interested in the ethics of care, like Nell Noddings has spoke about, and building relationships with my students. However, I didn't really realize that this came under the philosophy bracket of education. Regarding how I would like to apply this knowledge in the future, well, I enjoyed learning about the work of the Greeks, such as Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato. I was particularly interested in Socrates and Socratic questioning. So Socratic questioning is a method of asking questions, which prompts students to reflect and think critically, and it also encourages dialogue in the classroom. And I think dialogue has such an important role in the teaching and learning process. It's through discussion with one another that we learn. Also, sometimes so much new information can come up just by asking and answering questions. So in my evidence, I'll discuss a little bit about how I would use Socratic questioning in my language classroom. And then we also obviously looked at Nell Noddings and the idea of care, and then Mahabali also supports this idea. And this really resonated with me because care definitely plays a fundamental role in my own personal teaching philosophy. So I really enjoyed reading the pedagogy of care and reading about the ethics of care by Nell Noddings and Mahabali. And I will also discuss how I would show my students that I care in my evidence as well. So moving on now to how I would use Socratic questioning in the language learning classroom. Now, I do believe that it probably is easier to use Socratic questioning maybe in, well, not necessarily easier, but you could use much more Socratic questioning in, let's say, a history class or an English class, religion, where you're maybe giving more opinion. However, it can be implemented in language learning as well. So before you decide how you're going to use Socratic questioning, it's important to plan suitable questions. So questions which will facilitate and develop the students' learning, and making sure you're including all students in the discussion, and then also giving students time to think. So this is also part of differentiation. I think as teachers, we can be inclined to answer students or answer the question when students take too long to reply. But it's important to not do this and give students time to think. They will usually come to something at the end of it. So how I would then use Socratic questioning in my class would be, this is something I like to do. So say I have here a picture of a Leserverständnis, and that would be, obviously when you're reading a Leserverständnis, you're reading it more for understanding the language and answering the questions after. But it's important as well to look at it from a grammatical point of view. So I would stop and ask students, why is the article here dame? So when the article is dame, it means it's in the dative case. So why is it in the dative case? And then when students come to their conclusion, what reasoning did you come to that conclusion? So why? So that would be a way in which you could use Socratic questioning, probing more. So for grammatical elements. Other ways in which you can use Socratic questioning would be maybe if they were learning for their oral and you ask them to talk about their area, you might say, could you expand on that point further? Why did you say that? Could you give an example? So probing, looking for more information, getting students to think and reflect about what they're saying. So another thing as well is ideally you could ask these questions in the target language. That would be ideal. I just wrote them here in English just for the sake of the presentation, but ideally when it comes to fifth year in Leaving Cert, I will be hoping to ask the questions in the target language. So moving on then to the nature versus nurture debate. So obviously this is quite a large debate. So the idea of nature relating to your genetics, so that you're born with certain qualities. This was the thought of Plato. Then nurture, that your knowledge and personality traits, something we learn, we're influenced by our environment. This was the ideas of Aristotle and John Locke. So John Locke thought about the tabula rasa, so that we're a blank slate and that we just kind of are everything we are from our experience. I would say I personally believe in nature and nurture opposed to nature versus nurture. I think we're all born with a certain level of intelligence or certain personality traits, but that they can be nurtured and we can be influenced as we grow up. And the example that I have of this, which relates to me, is that I believe my interest and enthusiasm for German and Irish was actually shaped by my experience and shaped by encouragement from my parents rather than my own personal ability. So I got the book here. That's why I have the picture of it, the Little German for Beginners book. My mother got me this before I started German in secondary school, and I spent a month before school just reading through it, flicking through it every once in a while. And when I went to secondary school, then I felt really, really good at German and I really, really enjoyed the subject. But I believe that this was shaped by the encouragement from my parents, but also the fact that I felt good about myself when I was in the German classroom. I think maybe had I not had gotten that book, would I have liked German the same way? Maybe not. So that's in a way I feel like my kind of interest was nurtured. I also don't think that I am a particularly intelligent person. I think that um any points I got in my leaving cert, I had to work quite hard for and I had to study for. So I think in that way, I have nurtured any of the ability that I have to be where I am today. So I think, yeah, it will be for me personally, nature and nurture opposed to one versus the other. So then the purpose of education. So I think like that education has four core purposes. It's personal purpose, it's social purpose, it's cultural, and it's economic. Um, for the personal and social, I feel like they're kind of linked. So obviously your personal growth, how you engage with the world, social purpose, it teaches us about social norms and values, so how we behave in society, how we contribute to society. I also think as well, education can show us our talents, our abilities, or help us figure them out. Then it's cultural purpose, so understanding culture and diversity, the idea that we are going to pass on values and traditions of our culture to future generations. If you even look like that at the junior cycle specification, the massive influence that culture has on the Irish and German course. So it's really important that we understand the diversity of the world. And then economic purposes, ideally, I suppose the idea of education like that is to create citizens who will have the skills and the qualities to become a part of the workforce and to contribute to society. Moving on then, a little bit about Freire. So I really, really liked Freire's ideas about the idea of education being a tool for liberation and social transformation. It should be relevant to the lives of learners. And I can even see education is constantly evolving, but I even think that the new junior cycle course, the material on it is a lot more relevant to learners' lives opposed to maybe the junior cert that I sat, I don't know how many years ago now. But the idea even with language that we're trying to get students to create authentic language, that if they're dropped in Germany or they're dropped in the Gaeltacht, they're able to use that language opposed to rote learning. So I think that it is really important that it's relevant to our students' lives. The whole idea that students are active in the learning process. So as Freire rejected this banking model that we kind of just deposit information. So students need to be active in the process. So that was a little bit about purpose of education, the nature versus nurture debate, and how I would apply my learning of philosophy of education. I also will have a voice recording linked below where I will talk about how I would like to show my students that I care. So how I would do that in my classroom. But thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope that you enjoyed.